más amplio y objetivo, que aporte a la construcción de una estrategia que nos impulse a ocupar un lugar en la cúspide del progreso y a la vez
Hi everyone, welcome. Greg Davies is the Regional Sales Manager for the Oxford University Press Global Academic Business. He has taught students of all ages and levels, as well as being involved in teacher training for the past 9 years. Having given talks and seminars throughout Latin America, Greg has published internationally, and his areas of interest include classroom management as well as professional reflection. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. How are you? I hope you've had a really interesting conference over these couple of days. And well, I'm curious. In my life, I've been a teacher. I've taught kindergarten, primary, secondary, adults, etc. I'm just curious. Hands up if you're a teacher of English. Okay. Hands up if you're not a teacher. So hands up if you didn't put your hand up. All of you didn't put your hands up. Okay, so if you can put your hand up again if you're a teacher. How many of you teachers teach kinder and primary, secondary? No? Teenagers? Ooh, that's difficult. And adults? Okay. And hands up if you like assessment. Okay. Being assessed or assessing? Okay. So, what I wanted to talk about today was really assessment. Yeah. So we're language teachers, and I think we're all very passionate about teaching language. And really, the next question to say is, well, where does assessment fit into teaching language? And I think over the past couple of years, assessment has become more and more important. And my question is, why? Why is assessment becoming so important? So I started to think about this, and my first question was, how do you say assessment in Spanish? Evaluación? Anything else? Okay. So I think this is quite interesting because in Spanish, assessment is evaluación, which in English is evaluation. And then we have tests, which is exámenes. And how do you say assessment in Spanish? Okay. So assessment is evaluación, and evaluation is evaluación, and tests are exámenes. So for English, in English, we've actually got 3 levels of evaluation and assessment, whereas in Spanish, sometimes the word can mix up 2 different areas. So for us, tests are exámenes, and evaluation and assessment are evaluación. And they're related, but they are different. Okay? So let's take a look. Tests. A test is maybe a piece of paper and a pencil, and it's an evaluation. It's an exam of what we've been teaching, and hopefully, there's no guarantee, hopefully what your students have been learning, right? Okay. But then we have assessment. And assessment is really a much bigger picture of evaluation. And then finally you have evaluation. What do we mean by evaluation? We mean everything related to education. Yeah? Not just the exam, not just the learning, but education in general. So when we start to think about evaluation, we think about learning, but we also evaluate assessment tools. Is the test that we're giving the right test to be able to evaluate our students? Is there a different way that we could evaluate our students? We also evaluate our methodologies. Does anybody have any ideas of what methodologies they're currently using in their classrooms? Anybody? I like it when teachers say, I use an eclectic approach. What does that mean? Yeah. So there could be CLIL, content language integrated learning. There could be task-based teaching. There could be PPP, presentation, practice, production, etc., etc. So there must be, at some point, an evaluation of the methodologies that we're using, according to the vision of the institution where you work, according to your plan of studies, etc., etc. And very often what we do is we pick up a book and we teach it because that's what's there. And what we have to do as teachers is evaluate our methodology as well as evaluate the tools. And we have to be evaluated. Ooh. It's not very easy to be evaluated by our coordinators, to have somebody in our classroom giving us feedback. I often say that teaching is really curious because it's one of the most isolated jobs I think there is. We're in front of our students, so we think it's a social job, but when we close the door to the classroom, we're on our own. Yeah? And actually it's difficult for us to be able to sometimes ask for help from other teachers for ideas and tips, for example, with difficult students or students with learning needs, classroom management, etc. But if we really want to evaluate, we have to think about our evaluation. And that could be peer evaluation, that could be coordinated evaluation, and interestingly, that could be self-evaluation. We have to evaluate materials, right? How do we evaluate materials? Some schools make a decision from top to bottom. Other schools make decisions in an academic group. Other schools will have pilots and look at the advantages and disadvantages, etc., etc. Anyway, the point here is if we want to think about assessment, we don't only think about tests and exams of our students, we also have to think about evaluating everything that is involved in education. And then we have assessment of learning, right? So assessment of learning could mean, and I'm going to take these in reverse order, observations, self-evaluations, portfolios, and tests. Very often, what we do as teachers is we rely a lot on tests. Yeah? So we have unit tests, we have bimester tests, we have end of semester tests, we have Christmas tests, we have pop quizzes, we have quizzes of quizzes, we have, what's it called when they don't pass their exams and they have to take their tests again? There's just lots of tests, yeah? Which also means lots of marking that we have to do as teachers. Yeah? Portfolios is, I think, kind of the other end of the spectrum, which is the Shangri-La of evaluation for me, when a student is totally aware of the importance of learning and they're very internally motivated and they want to make a difference, etc. And they have the ability to develop a portfolio. Probably in my career of 10, 11 years of teaching, maybe I found one student who could do that effectively. But we've got the two extremes, right? We've got tests, which is very teacher-centered, let's say, portfolios, which is very student-centered. We have something like self-evaluation and observations somewhere in the middle. And a good example here with self-evaluation is many books, either at the beginning of the unit or at the end of the unit, have a little section, and it says, I can write a postcard, even though nobody uses postcards anymore. No? I can order dinner at a restaurant. And what we do sometimes as teachers is very quickly go, can you do that, students? Check the box, next page. Yeah? And actually, this is a golden opportunity to bring assessment of learning into the classroom. Yeah? And to ask your students to reflect on what they've learned and to reflect on how comfortable they feel writing a postcard, ordering food, etc. And if they don't feel comfortable, they should be able to create an action plan themselves to be able to study themselves to learn the pieces that they've missed. That would be, for me, self-evaluation. And then observations. How many times do we ask students to observe themselves at the end of the class? Or how many times do we ask our students to write a learning journal? So at the end of the class, the final couple of minutes, quickly in your notebook, what did you learn today? And what maybe do you need to do to continue learning this topic? Yeah? That level of observation of the student's self-learning could become very important to help students aprender, which is the competency-based approach, which is these days very, very important. So we've got evaluation of materials, we've got assessment for learning, and then we've got tests. Tests, and more tests, okay? So I think, well I don't think, Oxford University Press thinks that there are 4 Ps. 4 Ps of testing. Does anybody know what those 4 Ps are? Turn to your partners and discuss what types of tests do you have in your classroom. I'll give you a clue. 4 words, and all of them begin with P. Discuss with your partner. What tests do you have in your classroom that you can use to help your students learn, and they begin with Ps? Does anybody have any Ps? No? Nobody? Who said that? Who said that? Who said that? What did you say? Can't hear you. I can. Placement. Excellent. Okay, so the first P is a placement test. A placement test. Can anybody think of any other Ps? Now we're off on a roll. No? Proficiency. Good. Progress. Who said progress? Brilliant. Progress tests. Okay, which we also sometimes call achievement tests, right? Yeah. And then we have not so much production. Proficiency is the 4th P. What's the 3rd P? Huh? Somebody said it. Somebody said. Yeah, it's practice tests. We have practice tests, and then finally we have proficiency tests. Okay, so actually when we test, we have 4 different types of tests, each with different objectives to assess students' learning or to assess the students' level. So shall we take these and think about these? So what's one of the characteristics, or what are some of the characteristics of a placement test? When would we use a placement test? The key's in the word, right? We use a placement test to place a student, okay, at the beginning of a course, at the beginning of a semester, etc. One of the characteristics of a placement test is it should be fast, yeah, and if you're paying for it, it should be cheap, because it needs to basically place your test, place your students. Should the placement test, I'm not sure if I'm going to say that right, a placement test should have, for example, 100 questions, right? Should the student be able to answer the 100 questions? No, because if the student can answer the 100 questions, well then they've got a perfect level of language and they don't need your course, yeah? The idea is that a placement test should become more difficult over those 100 questions to identify where the student is placed in a course. Of course, many students don't understand this, so what they do sometimes is share best practices. We could also call that cheating. And with that, they have a great exam. And then they go into level 5, and they realize, hold on, this level of English is too difficult for me. And then they have to change down to levels. So the idea of a placement test is it's something that's very rapid, and it's very, well, it's not very reliable. That's the point, right? It's not very reliable, but it gives you an indicator of where your student sits in your courses, okay? Practice tests. Oh no, sorry, progress tests. When would we use progress tests? When would we use progress tests? The key's in the word. The key's in the word. We would use them to measure a student's progress. So it would be at the end of a unit, at the end of a semester, etc. Okay? And a progress test should measure everything that has been taught. Okay? This probably is the most common test that a teacher has to write. Okay? But we teachers, sometimes we're not experts in assessment, and we're not experts in writing tests. And unfortunately, the frustration sometimes for students is that we write a test, and in reflection, that test is not evaluating the unit or the semester that was taught. Maybe other things were added or taken and added into that test. Oh, thank you. so I'm going to assess her as brilliant. Okay? So in a progress test, what we have to have here is a test that evaluates exactly what we taught. Nothing more, nothing less, because we didn't teach our students. I mean, otherwise we're going somewhere else with assessment. And the other point here is, if we're having a progress test and we never taught our students how to answer a multiple choice type question, how do we expect them to be successful in a progress test that is written with multiple choice type questions? So it's not just about the content of the assessment, it's also about the style of the assessment as well. Practice tests. Why would we use practice tests? Why would we use practice tests in our classrooms? The key's in the word. To practice. What would we practice? What would we want our students to practice? The proficiency tests, because they're really expensive. Yeah, they're really, really expensive and really, really challenging, and they're high stakes, there's a lot of responsibility, and there's a lot that the students are betting to do something else in their lives if they pass their proficiency test. And it surprises me how many times a student will take a proficiency test and they never practiced. Okay? And for me, a student that is wanting to take a TOEFL or a BULAT or an IELTS, etc., they have to have practiced that literally thousands of times for the format of the test, the style of the test, the timings of the tests, etc., etc. So the practice test is designed to support the students in the proficiency test. And what is a proficiency test? It's very high stakes, it is a lot of responsibility, and if the student passes the proficiency test, then their futures will change. Maybe they can go and emigrate to Canada or to the UK, and they can become doctors, etc., etc. Yeah, this is a life-changing assessment that the student takes for proficiency. Does that make sense? So then I started thinking, now I know that there are 4 P's of assessment, now let's start to think about, well, what are the qualities of tests? And because I come from Oxford, I read an Oxford book that's all about language testing. I found it really interesting because what it said was that there are some specific qualities that we have to think about when we test. Okay? So for example, practicality. How many times have we had a test, let's say a class test, not a practice test, a proficiency test, the other test, yeah, and the students have got 1 hour to complete the test, but actually the test needs 1.5 hours to complete. Yeah? What we didn't do as teachers was to make sure that the number of questions could be answered in the time that we give the students to complete. Yeah? It's an understandable slip. Yeah? But what we need to do when we make a test is not only write those questions, not only make sure that our students know how to answer the types of questions, but we must also make sure that it's actually achievable in the time given. And for example, if you've got a computer-based test and you've got no internet connection in your classroom, it's not very practical, is it? So we have to think about how practical can the test be. And then we have to think about the reliability. Okay? So in primary school, you'll have your grades at the end of the school year, yeah? And the teacher writes the grades. How can I, as a parent, guarantee that a grade 8 in the school in Hidalgo is equivalent to a grade 8 in a school in Mexico City? Yeah? There's no reliability that this grade is actually the same in different places. And I think this is why we've started to see, I think in the last years, a tendency towards international exams, because if somebody passes an IELTS exam at level 6, that means something in China, in Germany, in Pachuca, in Monterrey. Yeah? The reliability of the test is very, very important. We need to make sure that these tests are consistent. And if it's in an institution, to make sure that my colleague is giving the same grade that I'm giving. Why? Because if the other colleague gives a higher grade and those students come into my class, I feel frustrated because I think these students have got this level, and actually I find out that the students have got this level, And now my whole plan, my semester plan, my idea is completely shot because I have to spend time to recover where I was going. That's an example of the reliability that we need to have between teachers in an institution. And then the impact. How does a placement test impact the life of a student? It doesn't. The worst case scenario is they go into level 5, we realize that level 5 is too high for them, we take them out after half an hour and put them into level 1. Okay? So there's not really very much impact. What's the impact of failing a TOEFL exam? Well, I'm not going to graduate. I'm not going to become a doctor. I bought my tickets to go to Canada and I'm not going to go to Canada now. Yeah? My whole life has changed. So the assessment has to evaluate the impact that that assessment has on the lives of the candidate who's taking the exam. And we have to think not only about teaching and learning, but also on society. What's the impact of having an international university from the other side of the Atlantic certifying your students here in Pachuca? What's the image that that is projecting to your students and the candidates taking the exam? And then how valid is the exam? Okay. Are we assessing what we're supposed to be assessing? Yeah. There are strategies for each types of question, or each question type on an exam. I gave you the example of multiple choice. Can anybody think of any other types of question types we could use in an exam? Anybody? No? Nobody? There's no types of questions we can use in an exam? We could be really horrible and make the students write an essay. Essay questions, we love them, students don't. Yeah. What else could we use? Multiple choice, short answers, gap fills, open-ended questions, closed-ended questions. Now, there's many, many different types of questions that you can use depending on what you want to achieve in your exam and your evaluation, which depends on which of the 4 Ps you want to use. Yeah? The point here is many times the exam does not assess what the students have just been learning. And that's not the fault of the students, and often that's not the fault of the teacher, because you're busy people, and the last thing you have is 5 hours to write an exam, right? Okay. And then authenticity. Okay. So for me, authenticity means, what's the point of asking somebody to read read an activity based on people in London when a student in Pachuca has never left the state of Hidalgo? Well, this is a question that's not very authentic for them. You know, it's not valid. It doesn't mean anything to them. You know, is it their fault if they don't make a connection to that situation? And that's going to make them, that's not going to help them to be successful in the assessment. So the authenticity of the exam is very, very important. And the interactiveness. As I mentioned, what's the point of having an internet-based exam if we don't have internet connection in the classroom? Yeah? What's the point of having a photocopyable exam if the coordinator will not permit us to make photocopies? Okay, I don't think that's ever happened wherever I've ever been. Okay, so we have to think about these kinds of things when we talk about assessment. And then you see, I think this is quite funny because I then realized if you added test of English, we then have a private eye. Okay, which is the private eye of the investigator. The investigator evaluating the assessment and finding out the level of the student's English, etc., etc. So if you're thinking about assessment and it's interesting for you, think private eye investigating. Okay. So we'll then take these parts: practicality, reliability, validity, authenticity, and interactiveness, these 5. I'm going to come back to impact in a moment. Okay. So what do we do with our evaluations, our tests? We have to find a balance. And the balance is interesting because if you've got an exam that is very valid and is very authentic and has a good level of interactivity, for example, the IELTS exam, well, actually, it's not very practical. Yeah? On the other side, you can go on the scales and have a placement test, which you can apply very quickly when a student walks into the reception and wants to know which level of course they want to join. Yeah, you can have practicality, but you're not going to have an exam that is very valid. So the challenge here is, how do we find the balance in assessment to make practicality, reliability, validity, authenticity, and interactiveness equal, to effectively assess our students' level of English? I tell you, that is not easy. How do I know? Because after thinking about all of this, that started from, how do you say assessment in Spanish? Literally, that's where all of this came from in my head. How do you say assessment in Spanish? I then started thinking about all of that, and I thought, well then, let's take a walk down memory lane. Okay? And there are 10 key points, 10 key exams or evaluations that have happened or occurred or have been delivered to the market in the past 100 years. And the first one started in 1913. Okay, and I have to read this because I didn't memorize this part. I know a little bit about an IELTS exam, but I don't know very much about the exam of 1913. But I thought it was really interesting because this exam in 1913 was created in England in the time of the Empire, when England was in charge of India and all of these other places. And what they wanted to do was find out the level of English of the people who lived in the Empire. Guess how long this exam took in 1913? How long do you think this exam took in 1913? 3 hours? 4 hours? Any advance on 4 hours? 5, is it 8 hours? Anything else? It took 12 hours. Okay, and if you look right now in terms of cost, it would be equivalent to £293. So if you think 25 pesos to the pound right now, this exam was like 25,000 pesos, no more, 50,000? 50,000 pesos for a 12-hour exam that had two components, writing and oral. I thought this was just quite funny. In the writing part, the candidates had to translate from English into French or German, and then they had to translate in French or German into English for their writing part. And they had to do an English essay for 2 hours, and they even had to do an activity on English phonetics for 1.5 hours. I mean, even I as a native speaker couldn't do anything with phonetics. And then there was an oral part, and they had to listen to somebody and dictate what they did for half an hour. And there was reading and conversation for half an hour. And it was really, really focused on England. Yeah. So that was the first exam. And this is what it looked like. But that's where it all started. That's where we got to today in 2017. So then the next thing that came along, okay, so was it a very practical exam? 12 hours is not very practical. Was it very reliable? I'm not entirely sure. If it cost 50,000 pesos or more than 50,000 pesos, how many people could take it? Did it have a big impact here in Mexico? Doubt it. Was it valid? Who knows? Was it authentic? Got no idea. Okay. Was it interactive? Well, the students had to do their dictation, right? Okay. But you know, it's the first time that an international exam was generated, and I think that it was the benchmark, the first point that assessment, evaluation, started to become serious. The other curious thing was, it was over 100 years ago. So from there, you then had Trinity College London, and then after Trinity College, the year after, I want to make sure I've got this right, in 1939, Cambridge produced an exam called and I think this is funny, it was called the lower certificate. So you're not normal, you're lower, okay? Which then suggests that there is a higher, okay? And think about all of those stigmatisms that students or candidates in 1938, 1939 had. But again, I don't think it's criticism, because what they said was, this first exam in 1913 is not practical. No, it's not working, so we need to evolve. And they evolved into the lower certificate. And Trinity College realized that the need for assessment is important, and they brought their alternative, which had these things. Their evaluation had abstract ideas, had expressing regrets and wishes and hopes. This is a lot more real than writing an essay for 2 hours and dictation, right? Yeah. Paraphrasing, evaluating options and hypothesizing. So you see now the evolution of exams is becoming much more student-centered. It's taken 20 years to get there, but we got there in the end. Okay. The question was this a very practical exam? Don't think so. Was it reliable? Not sure. Was it having a better impact? Absolutely, because now we're measuring students' abilities to you know, I would love to come to your party, but unfortunately, I'm washing my hair. You know? Remember those things in classes? A lot more valid than previous exams. A lot more authentic. It's got a lot more real situations that students could actually be faced with. Yeah, and it was maybe more interactive than the original exam in 1913. Then from there, we moved on to the TOEFL. So the TOEFL, I think, was really a watershed in the world of evaluation, because it's the first time that we started to see the need to evaluate competencies. Yeah, and real communicative language. And it was a lot more focused on the students. And of course, it was a lot more, 100% more, focused for American English and for students or candidates to go to the United States. Yeah. So, what did they have to do? Now they had the whole famous multiple choice, the little capsules that you have to complete. Do you remember those reading machines with the lectors that you would put the answer sheets in and it automatically graded them? It was a revolution in the time, yeah. And here we're starting to look at, in this case, identifying main ideas, characters, predicting, etc., etc. So how practical, how private eye was this? A lot more practical, a lot more reliable. Impact. Did it impact people here in Mexico? Did it impact people here in Hidalgo in 1964? I don't know. Was it valid? Was it authentic? Was it interactive? I don't know. But hopefully you can see that we're seeing an evolution in assessment. Okay, and look at the timescales as well, from 1913 to 1938, and now from 1938 to 64. We're starting to go faster. IELTS. Has anybody taken the IELTS exam? Hands up if you've taken the IELTS exam. One? Anyone else? No one else? Okay. Does anyone know what IELTS stands for? No? International English Language Testing System. Does anybody know who creates this exam? No? So this exam is a collaboration between 3 entities. The first is Cambridge English Language Assessment. The second is IDP, which is the organization or the body in Australia. And the third one is the British Council. So these 3 elements came together to say we need to have an alternative to the TOEFL, I imagine, and what we want to do is to evolve evaluation. Okay? So it started in 1989. An interesting fact is in 2017, this is the most successful or the most taken exam in the world. Yeah, this is the most popular exam in the world. A couple of years ago, it was the most taken exam in the world except in Mexico. And in Mexico, the TOEFL exam has always been very, very, very strong, I imagine, for the relationship to the US. Now that many US universities take and accept the IELTS exam has started to become more popular here in Mexico as well. Okay? So, if you know about the IELTS exam, you know that there are 4 sections: reading, writing, speaking, listening. The speaking part is a 11 to 15 minute interview. The reading has got specific questions, etc., etc. It's very structured. Yeah. And the idea of IELTS is that a student who will go and continue studying academically will use this certificate to prove their level of English. So the types of questions that you find in an IELTS, the kinds of activities you would find if you were studying in a university in the US, in the UK, in Australia, or in Canada. So there's a lot more practicality about this test than previous tests. Oh, but it's not completely practical. Yeah, it's very reliable. So at some point in my life, I've been an IELTS oral examiner, and I remember being told once that there was a scandal in China. There's a Chinese candidate exchanged their identification, and they went in, and somebody who wasn't that somebody went in and took the exam and got the grade, and from that grade, this Chinese student went to Canada, and in Canada they said, hold on, this person says they've got a band 8, and they've not got a band 8. Okay? And as a result of that, IELTS started to take photographs of the people, and now the people have to take their fingerprints when they enter into the exam room and they enter out of the exam room, which makes the exam a lot more valid and safe. And I remember thinking as an examiner, what is going on? But it's actually very important, very, very important to guarantee that reliability throughout the world. Yeah. What's the impact of IELTS? Well, if only one person in this room has taken the IELTS exam, I'm not entirely sure that it's impacted Pachuca very much right now. Maybe in the future it will. Who knows? Is it valid? Exceptionally valid. And it's exceptionally expensive as well. You pay for that validity. Is it authentic? Very much so. Okay. Is it interactive? I think it's very practical in terms of the skills that the student is being evaluated on are the skills the student will use in their future. And then Oxford decided to make their own exam, but it didn't work. Okay, it wasn't very successful. We didn't like doing that, so we decided to stop. But what we did was work with another organization, and this was the certificate at the time, and it was a revolution. In 1995. Can anybody imagine what the revolution about our exam was? No? No ideas at all? I'll give you an idea. The candidate speaking was recorded, grabado, was recorded on a tape. It was a revolution in that time, okay? And that meant somebody else could evaluate for the validity, etc., etc. Yeah? But as I'm saying, there's an evolution and revolution in assessment over these years. Oh, does anybody remember this? I don't remember this. I never did this in my French classes. I did completely. Yeah, you had your little tape cassette players. There used to be a little teacher who would be sitting here, and they could listen into you and monitor you. You're nodding your head. Yeah, well, that was technology in those days. Okay. So we start to go faster, and we have the CEFR. What does the CEFR stand for? And is that relevant here in Mexico? It's interesting, isn't it? Especially when I go to the north, where there's a lot of American English, they kind of say to me, why should we be interested in the Common European Framework of Reference of languages, which started in 2001. But it didn't start in 2001. It actually started back in 1975. So 1975 was when people in Europe said, hold on, if somebody says I'm an advanced level speaker, what does that mean? Yeah? And hold on, if I'm an advanced level speaker in English, does that mean the same in French or in German or Bulgarian or any other language that you can imagine? So there was a need for standardization. So I think the real revolution with the Common European Framework was the idea of evaluating what the students can do as opposed to what the students cannot do. Yeah? So this is where this whole thing of these can-do statements comes along. And really, we do not want to use the word advanced because that makes us think that we've got people who are lower and maybe, well, for sure, not so good, and there's whole stigmatisms around this. So instead of calling them advanced, beginners, etc., we call them A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2, to take away the stigmatism of using these words which make people feel that they've either got a better or a lower level of English. Do any of you ever recruit people? Are any of you in human resources, do you recruit people? Okay, I do. And I just love reading people's CVs because it says, I've got 100% English. And I think, I'm a native speaker and I don't have 100% English, no? I've got 75% English. And every time I have an interview, I want to ask them, so what does 75% English mean? Yeah? It's impossible to evaluate a level of English from 0 to 100. And that was the revolution with the Common European Framework. Let's focus the students on what they can do. Because unfortunately, tests focus the students on what they can't do. Oh, teacher, you gave me a 7. Pero me caes muy bien. Give me another point. Give me an 8, please. Please. Yeah? Is that okay? Take an 8. I don't care. If you want an 8, take an 8. No? So they don't focus on the celebration of the 7 points that they got. They focus on the 3 points they didn't get. Does that sound familiar? Does that sound frustrating? Does that sound like English language teaching today? Absolutely. And it's difficult. It's a real challenge to change your students' perception. It's not about the grade 8 or an A or a B or a C. It's about showing your students what they can do competency-wise with their level of English. So I think this is quite interesting because 2001 was the key point for the Common European Framework reference of languages, not specifically for English. So for example, if I ask Josep, my colleague here in Hidalgo, what's my level of Spanish? Okay, using the Common European Framework. He just said a high level. What would you say my level of Spanish is in the Common European Framework? Nah, he wants a pay rise. No. I would say I'm a B1 writing. I hope a B1 plus in speaking Spanish. But I have a gringo accent, I would suggest. But what my point here is I can use the Common European Framework to evaluate my Spanish just as much as you can use the Common European Framework to evaluate your English or your students' English. And that was very radical. And then, hold on, why is all this happening in Europe? I want something here. So CENI came up with an idea of evaluating, and this is the scale. And actually, personally, I like it. I think that splitting the A1s, A2s, etc. into the CENI levels, I think it's here up to 18, right? 18, 19, I think here, is actually, better. Why? Because a B2 level could be a B2 plus or a B2 minus. Yeah? And then some people argue that on the Common European Framework, we're missing an A0. Sometimes teachers say to me, you never have in that first level of an English class, you don't have true beginners. Here in Mexico, people have had some exposure to English. But then other teachers will say to me, I have been in a class where a student is starting from 0, 0, 0. So if there is a true A0 level, why shouldn't it be in the Common European Framework? Well, it is in CENI. I think that's important, and I think that's an interesting evolution of exams. So Mexico decided to have their own exams. And then TOEFL said, well, hold on, if everything's changing, I'm going to make my IBT. Internet-based test. Okay? And here is the example of the internet-based test. Hands up. Hands up if you're not sleeping. Ah, that's good news. Hands up if you're taking a photograph. Ah, okay. Hands up just because it's Friday. Yay. Good. Hands up if you've taken the TOEFL IBT. That was the true question. Okay, great. So have you ever had this? I used to have students, teacher, I need to pass the TOEFL. Okay, calm down. What's the grade that you need? A pass. Okay, well, there's a little bit more involved than a pass. Are you going to do this was some years ago because I'm old now. Are you going to take the internet exam or are you going to take the paper exam? Oh, I don't know. No? And then you find out what they're actually going to do is they're going to get a practice version off the internet and they're going to take it and they consider that that is their level of their TOEFL. Yeah? students have lost the perception of what is a TOEFL, because now there are different versions of TOEFL, and there are literally hundreds of versions online, practice type tests that you can use. So the IBT online is very practical for students now, better, much better than the paper-based test, which used to take 100 years, right? And there used to be questions like, can you identify the subjunctive clause of the passive voice of the active verb of the third noun? And I, as a teacher, would be like, I've got no idea, good luck, no? Is the exam reliable, the TOEFL IBT? I think so. I think using computer-based, internet-based technology is a big advance in assessment. I think that helps a lot. Why is the exam questionable for its impact? For me, I think it's lost a little bit of its reliability, and its validity, because students don't understand the difference between 900 points, 600 points, 100 points in the paper and the computer-based test and the IBT-based test, and the idea that actually you have to take the exam and not take a practice test that you can find on the internet. And then this happened. So what happened? What is this saying? Does anybody know anybody from Ireland? Has anybody talked to a person from Ireland? It's really difficult. They have a really strong accent. For me, it's like listening to somebody, a Mexican from Chihuahua. Right? I'm fascinated by their accent. I've got no idea what they're saying, but I'm fascinated by their accent. No? And I say to them, disculpa, ¿puedes hablar un poco más despacio? And they say, okay? Kind of the same idea with Irish people. It's beautiful accent, but the computer-based technology that the IBT had was computer voice recognition, and so this native speaker took the TOEFL and she failed because maybe the technology still isn't there yet. Okay, so that was the TOEFL. Aptis. Does anybody know what is Aptis? Does anybody have an idea about Aptis? Anybody? At the back? At the front? Anybody? One person? Ah, okay. I was kind of betting, two people. I was kind of betting that nobody would. Okay? Because this was the exam that was generated or created by the British Council. I think it's a very valid exam. I think it's very innovative, but unfortunately, not many people know of the existence of the Aptis exam. Okay? So you get a really nice report card, and we start to see here splitting the grades by the 4 skills. So now we can see in this example the candidate is actually weaker in speaking than listening and reading and writing. Yeah? And we start to give them real grades. This was an evolution. Maybe not a revolution at the time, but it was definitely an evolution. Not to give the student a grade, but to give them splits of those grades. Okay? So the Aptis came from the British Council, as I mentioned. It's very practical, it's computer-based, it's very reliable. Yep. What's the impact of this exam? Not sure. Only 2 people in this room have heard of the exam Aptis. Yeah. Is it very valid? Not sure, because if you don't know about the exam, how can you accept the exam as an institution? Yeah. Is it very authentic? Absolutely. I think the questions are good, the way that it's written is very good, and it's very, very interactive, which is positive. So some strengths and weaknesses. And then we have a little break. And in this break, Cambridge decided to make the Cambridge scale. Has anybody heard of the Cambridge scale? The teacher in green again. Okay. Anybody else? No? So what do you think is the Cambridge scale? Any ideas? It's a scale. It comes from Cambridge. Okay. So what we said here, well, I didn't, what Cambridge said was, look, instead of just giving the students a grade, now let's evolve the thing we saw with Aptis, with the skills being split, and now let's start to use indicators for levels of English. Interestingly, with Cambridge, we have use of English. So we've actually got 5 elements. I can't say 5 skills, 5 elements. And we can start to see where the students, again, are strong and weak, and then this brings them into the Cambridge scale, which then gives them their overall score on the Common European Framework. And so now, in 2015, just 2 years ago, we started to show our students that they did pass, But we started to give them more details about their exam. Compare this to 1913, when they had their dictation and they had their translations from English to German and then German to English, and it was a 12-hour exam that cost more than 50,000 pesos. The evolution of evaluation is massive over these years. Oh, is anybody a Cambridge examiner? Is any? Just say you're a Cambridge examiner. Anybody else? Has anybody taken a Cambridge exam? Okay, so does this look familiar? Yes. So this is the speaking exam, right? So what happens here? You need to speak with a partner. So you have some interaction with the partner or with the examiner. Who's the examiner? Are they both the examiners? Are you sure? Or is Big Brother watching you? What's the name of this person? It's not Philip. What's his name? He's got a good name. I love this word. He's the interlocutor. Or is it her? I can't remember. So you have an examiner, you have an interlocutor who is the facilitator of the conversation, and then you've got the evaluator. Yeah, you're right, I'm wrong. This person's evaluating, and this person is facilitating the conversation, and these two are fighting to speak. Because if my partner's speaking, I'm not speaking. If my partner's speaking, I'm not being evaluated. So how does this work? Yeah? How valid is that? How reliable is that? How effective is that? Think of the saying private eye. But is there anything better? I don't know. It's really difficult. I'm not criticizing the exams that there are. I'm just questioning or challenging why the exams we have today are the way they have the form that exams have today. Okay? And this brings us up to Prolex. Does anybody know where is Prolex? I wanted to quote something here. Has anybody heard of Prolex? Nobody. It's in Guadalajara. No? So Prolex is the Centro de Idiomas of the University of Guadalajara. And they decided to make their own exam. And I wanted to read to you the email. They told us that they're going to make their own exam. And I thought this was quite big, you know. Why is this big? Because it's really expensive to make an exam. Really, really expensive to make an exam. So what they said was, we created the exam because of the huge demand for proficiency tests in Jalisco. These exams are typically made in foreign countries and contribute little to the economy and research here in Mexico. We did not want to associate with another exam company and simply copy their exam. We feel that since proficiency tests are being used throughout the educational system from elementary to exit at universities, Mexicans should benefit from this financially and intellectually. Therefore, we created an original 4-skill test in Jalisco under the supervision of a PhD in assessment. Because this test is created locally, I believe it is more appropriately addresses the needs of learners in our context. For instance, Language 2, second language literacy skills, are a huge obstacle to learners in Mexico. Our exam has a read to write section, which would provide positive washback that promotes needed literacy skills in English. This follows the trend in the UDG, where teachers are being trained in level 2 literacy skills and being pushed to promote foreign language literacy in class. So to me, this is a really interesting evolution, and my argument could be, this could be a revolution in language teaching and assessment, because now a local, a Mexican organization has decided to take a local perspective on language assessment. So it's not 1913 with the British Empire telling you what to do with evaluation. We've now got an organization in Jalisco identifying the needs of Mexican students and evaluating Mexican students' level of English. And that really is where we've got from 1913 to 2016. And there they are. So, what can we conclude? Over 100 years, the price has gone down and down and down, from 50,000 pesos to, let's say, 2,000 pesos. And we've moved from high-stakes exams to mid-stakes exams. And I think this is a really significant point to remember in assessment. Many of our students say, I want to take the TOEFL. Specifically, they've said that to me. I want to take the TOEFL. I need the IELTS. And when you ask your students why, there's no clear reason that they want to take that exam, other than they want an external organization to validate their level of English. So the question is, do many students, the thousands of students in Mexico that take exams, do they need high stakes? This exam costs 3,000 pesos, and if you don't pass the exam, you don't move to Canada to study your doctorate, and this is going to change your life. Do many of the students need this, or do many students need mid-stakes? An exam which is externally recognized, which shows what your student's level of English is. We've definitely gone from a global exam, the 1913 Cambridge Proficiency Exam, all the way to the Prolex Local Jalisco exam, the EPET. And I think we're going to find a lot more localizations of exams as the local context becomes more important. Yeah. And authenticity has become much more important. We cannot evaluate English. We must evaluate the competencies that go around English. Learning to learn, the educational tendency is absolutely correct and valid. If we're teaching this in the classroom, our assessment has to assess this in the exam as well. So I think we're going to see a lot more authenticity in our exams. Real situations that your students could see when they are presenting their exam, when they are studying in a classroom type situation. Okay. I think finally, where is assessment going, or where has assessment come from, to where is assessment going? I think it's all about standards, standardization. We go from the Common European Framework, A1 to C2, all the way to the Cambridge scales, and TOEFL and IBTs, etc. in the middle. So, I hope, that shows you the impact of assessment from 1913 to 2017. Assessment is definitely impacting your students' lives. Okay? What worries me is that we as teachers are now teaching our students to pass the exam. And we're not teaching our students to be effective communicators. If we're lucky, the two things come together. If we're not lucky, we spend a lot of valuable time teaching your students to pass. Is that practical and reliable? I don't know. Is it valid, authentic, and is it interactive? I don't know. These are the questions that we must ask when we're thinking about assessment, and which exam to propose to our students, and also to consider when we're thinking about the 4 Ps of assessment. Does anybody remember the 4 Ps of assessment? What are the 4 Ps of assessment? Placement, progress, or practice, and proficiency. Great. If you can remember those 4 Ps of assessment, I think that's the next hot potato in language teaching right now. Thinking about those 4 Ps and why we're assessing. And that was my idea. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions? None at all. Okay, well, there's my email address. Okay. You know, we're very proud, Oxford University Press, one of the best universities in the world, to be here supporting you. And I'd invite each of you to join our Oxford Teachers Club. If you look in Google, Oxford Teachers Club is a free forum for you teachers to join. It takes about 30 seconds to register. If you are interested in assessment and the tests and evaluations, then absolutely the Oxford Teachers Club will have more things for you to take that conversation further. Okay? And here's my email address. Please feel very free to contact me if you have any questions about assessment. And I will not assess you. You can assess me. Okay? Thank you very much.
Repitamos el aplauso para Greg Davies por su brillante ponencia. Y pedimos a la licenciada Diana Matzalén Hernández Cortés, directora del Centro de Lenguas de esta Casa de Estudios, haga entrega de un reconocimiento a Greg Davies por su brillante ponencia. Agradecemos la presencia de nuestro invitado especial y a todas y todos ustedes les invitamos a que se queden en sus lugares, pues estamos por iniciar la clausura del primer Congreso Lengua, Cultura y Formación Continua. Les reiteramos la invitación para que continúen en sus lugares. Estamos a unos minutos de iniciar con esta ceremonia de clausura.
Nos recordó que la enseñanza de idiomas no tiene por qué ser aburrido, ni siempre utilizar los mismos materiales. Los souvenirs son muy buenos elementos para enseñar el idioma y vincularlo con la cultura que hay detrás de ellos. Algo que aprender. De Bernardine y Kenneth Clark, muchas gracias por siempre estar con nosotros. La Universidad Autónoma les agradece mucho el esfuerzo y la disposición siempre para cooperar con nosotros. Gracias. Aprendimos sobre la elaboración de materiales con una base en una metodología cualitativa y cuantitativa. Céline de Gardin nos mostró que una certificación no solo es un medio para ratificar nuestro conocimiento, va más allá de eso. Rachida Salama nos recordó que el lenguaje es parte vital de la comunicación y la comunicación para la sana convivencia de los humanos. Y para tener una comunicación efectiva en nuestros semejantes es mejor hablar el idioma del otro, mejor comunicación. Carlos Sotelo nos enseñó que hay mucha oferta de capacitación con becas para profesores de alemán, además de la plática que nos dio sobre Alemania moderna y la cultura de ella. De Irma West aprendimos el uso de apps para la enseñanza de lenguas. De la plática de Lois Meyer aprendimos que dentro de la enseñanza y aprendizaje de lenguas debe haber siempre un conocimiento del mundo actual, inevitable por supuesto. De temas relevantes y controvertidos para generar discusión y pensamiento crítico en los alumnos, que hoy en día es lo que nos hace falta. Del doctor Jaime Magos nos hizo reflexionar sobre los retos que enfrenta el docente del siglo XXI y la importancia de capacitarse, porque somos el ejemplo o modelo a seguir y debemos ser dignos de ello. Muchas gracias, doctor. Sin duda, lo de Greg Davies, lo que acaba de exponer el maestro Greg Davies, es suma a la infinidad de enseñanzas que hemos tenido a lo largo de este congreso. Nos ha dejado a todos nosotros con una gran lección en cuanto a lo académico. La enseñanza de aprendizajes hoy en día es algo básico y tenemos estos escenarios justamente para fortalecerlo. No puedo faltar, obviamente, el agradecimiento a nuestras editoriales. A todas ellas, muchas gracias por ser parte de este congreso. La Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo les agradece su presencia y siempre son bienvenidos. No olvidemos que la capacitación y la actualización continua son imprescindibles para el perfeccionamiento de nuestra práctica docente. La Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo seguirá preocupada, pero más que eso, ocupada en ofrecer estos escenarios para ustedes, para el fortalecimiento de la enseñanza y el aprendizaje de idiomas, para generar una cultura más fortalecida y sobre todo el llegar a las mentes de nuestros estudiantes, el generar un ambiente académico, analítico, pensamiento crítico y sobre todo el generar un impacto directamente en las aulas. La universidad está preocupada por generar una educación de alta calidad en nuestro estado y ustedes son parte de este gran proyecto. Muchas gracias a todos ustedes. Les doy la más cordial bienvenida a SIL 19. Gracias. Algo muy importante resaltar a lo largo de todo este convenio es que seguimos con los trabajos. El Congreso no termina aquí. Esto es solo una parte que inicia de esto. Tenemos mucho que hacer todavía y tenemos que dar seguimiento a los trabajos que hoy se han establecido. Por ejemplo, como gran resultado, y me es grato comunicarles a ustedes, se firmará un convenio específico con la Universidad de Pelotas Brasil para la movilidad educativa. Agradecemos a la maestra Marcia Morales Cli, traductora principal del Centro de Vinculación de la Universidad Federal de Pelotas Brasil. Muchísimas gracias por estos vínculos, muchísimas gracias a todos ustedes por estos resultados. Y la universidad no le queda de otra a la universidad más que agradecer la presencia de ustedes y con esto damos concluidos los trabajos de SIL 2017. Muchas gracias a todos ustedes.
Y para el público. Especial, muy especial, es enorme. Yo creo que la universidad es mayor que mi pueblo.
De manera que el sustento de la cultura, la base de la cultura es la lengua. Y me parece acertadísimo que esta reunión esté hecha con el tema, con el enfoque lengua y cultura. La cultura es posible gracias a la lengua.
I think that this is a very important theme, that very often people who learn languages think of a language as learning vocabulary and grammar and being able to just talk, and they sort of assess their fluency. But nowadays, in this world, I think language has become of the utmost importance, because that's the only way that we're going to avoid destroying our planet. I'm very, this is a theme for me where I become, I think if we don't, make this world where people understand each other, and the first step to understanding each other is to be able to understand what the person is saying. Behind the language is a culture. Behind the culture there are people, but we're all human beings. No matter what our religion, our race, or our culture, we all come from the same origin. So I think this is a very important step. And I think the fact that we're linking languages and culture is very important.
Pues muy satisfactoria, muy contenta de ver mucha gente joven, muy motivada, muy participativa y una gran experiencia de aprendizaje, de compartir muchos colegas ya conocidos de muchos años.
Bonjour à tous, je suis Delphine Pluvinet de l'Université Autónoma de Querétaro et je vous invite pour le prochain congrès du CIL 2018 à l'Université Autónoma de Hidalgo.
Hallo, ich bin Irma Wüst, ich bin Lehrerin im Goethe-Institut und dieses Jahr habe ich an der CIL 2017 teilgenommen und ich freue mich schon auf CIL 2018 und ich würde mich sehr freuen, wenn viele Lehrer nachher den Weg finden würden und also teilhaben könnten.
Hello, my name is Carol Leatherby. I live in San Francisco, California. I work at the University of California, Berkeley Extension, teaching on a certificate program in English. I am also a part-time assistant professor at the New School in New York, and I'd like to invite you to the second Congress in Lengua-Cultura at the University of Hidalgo in Pachuca.
Agradecemos a todas y todos ustedes su asistencia y participación en el primer Congreso Internacional de Lengua, Cultura y Formación Continua. Para la Universidad Autónoma del Estado de Hidalgo, ha sido un honor haber contado con su presencia. Los invitamos a que participen en el segundo Congreso Internacional de Lenguas CIL, a celebrarse en el mes de octubre del 2019, con el tema Escenarios virtuales como medio de interacción para la adquisición de lenguas, lengua y tecnología, el camino de ida y vuelta hacia una realidad. Muy buenas tardes y buen viaje.